Good evening to the press conference for the announcement of the Kingdom's budget for the year 1444-46. We have just seen the statement by the Ministerial Council headed by the custodian of the two holy mosques, where the announcement of the budget was made for the next fiscal year, where the custodian of the two holy mosques has stressed, and we have seen that very clearly, which is annually repeated and closely followed by the custodian of the two holy mosques, and ensuring that the ministers, including myself, to be committed fully to the implementation of all projects, strategies subsidized by the budget, particularly in details. We have also seen the statement by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the head of the Ministerial Council, the Prime Minister, for the government strategy for the next fiscal year. He stressed the commitment of the government to continue to work on enhancing economic growth by expanding government expenditure to help the financial sustainability of the kingdom and continue to implement projects and programs that have economic and social return. His Royal Highness emphasized the continuous effort of the government for the public and the structural reforms on both economic and financial sides in light of Vision 2030, and achieving financial sustainability in the medium and long terms to enhance the position of the Saudi economy facing the challenges and global developments. His Royal Highness spoke about the long-term and medium-term aims to maintain sustainable fiscal indicators through a strategic expenditure that helps the structural reform in the economy, the nationalization of industries to fulfill the goals of Vision 2030 and achieve comprehensive development and develop all the areas and promising sectors. It has been kind of customary, and I will try somehow to keep my introduction short and also the presentation in order to allow a greater opportunity for questions. I'm going to quickly review with you over the next slides the economic indicators about the economic situation of the kingdom. Also the short, medium-term and economic performance, and then we're going to open up for questions and inquiries. Regarding the economic indicators, I believe it is quite crucial before I mention any figures in the slides here to take a minute to give an idea about the development of economy in general. Saudi economy in general is going through an exceptional development phase and also very balanced. We see this in a number of indicators, whether the fulfillment of the goals of Vision 2030 regarding the growth of GDP, the non-oil GDP. I spoke last year and the year before about the importance to focus on the goals of Vision 2030, which is the non-oil revenues. And the non-oil economy covers the industries and retail and services such as tourism and financial services. Here we see a great expansion. We have seen figures which were previously published either by the international organizations or locally or the IMF. We have seen great testimonies by the classification organizations, and probably Saudi Arabia is second or third country, if I may recall well, in obtaining positive classifications for the year 2023 from 3 international agencies. On the other hand, which we also, we're not going only to look at the non-oil GDP revenues, we look at other things. If we look at the balance of payments is greatly positive for the year 2023. The employment rate is very high. The employment rates are the lowest historically in over at 8.3 amongst Saudis and less probably than 5% in the average for the entire workforce in the kingdom. If we perceive it from other perspective also, how many jobs were created by the Saudi economy in 2023. We have created new jobs in 2023 of over 1.1 million jobs, over 130,000 jobs for Saudis. This tells of a great economic activity that has happened in 2023. I'm going to speak about some figures here that give an idea where we stand now. On the right here, you have the nominal GDP, and it has an exceptional growth. But I would like here to tell you some story from the vision, where we started and where we stand now. And I intended to keep this in small font here to the right side because it is very worthy of telling in a very special way. It is not just a figure to flash out. I want to talk about it very carefully. We started in 2016 when we announced the vision up 2.5 trillion as an overall GDP. Today, the overall GDP is over 4.1 trillion with a growth of 65% from the day we announced the vision till today. Now we are halfway through our vision. We are halfway towards 2030. Our achievement is really very worthy of contemplation and thinking, not only for 1 or 2 or 3 years. Second point, which I also believe is extremely worthy of thinking, in the growth of the GDP as a percentage. In 2023, there's 0.03, and the main reason is the decision of the government to reduce the oil production to a great level that reaches about 17%. Of course, it impacts the GDP as a percentage. However, this is not my main concern. My main concern is the GDP, the non-oil GDP. And we here witness on the screen a growth of non-oil GDP from now until 2027 or 2023 will be at a rate of 6%. This is a big rate. This is a big growth. And some economic analysts and our colleagues believe that we are a little bit conservative here. And I think this is very important. The other important fact here is inflation. Inflation is a global phenomenon. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not isolated, but with the government support, we were able to somehow control the inflation. This year, it will be 2.6, and then it will start to decrease next year and the following year until it gets to 1.9 by 2026. Regarding the financial indicators, I believe they are extremely crucial. And before we look at the figures, I would like to remind you that when we stood here last year, we were expecting specific figures for revenues. And some friends asked me, and probably some of them are here this evening, to what extent are you confident of these expectations of revenues, particularly with all the accelerating developments that are taking place in the global markets and the economic and in the crises. We had the Russian-Ukrainian crisis and other crises related to inflation and increased interest rates and their impact on economic activity. I mentioned at that time that generally the government is greatly reserved about their estimations of revenues. It was good that our expectations were not far from the truth, despite two things that have happened. First, the kingdom decided together with its partners in OPEC and OPEC Plus a big reduction in oil. And of course, this impacts revenues. Also, we witnessed a reduction or a drop of 20% in the oil prices compared to last year. The last year average was about 100, and this year the average is about $80 to $82 a barrel. Despite this fact, our revenues this year are higher than the revenues that we announced. The two main reasons: one, we are dealing with very cautious, and we make expectations, and we want to make sure that we can take any shocks. Two, which is the happy news, that the non-oil economic activity was much better than expected. And therefore, the non-oil revenues were much better than our expectations. We see this now in figures. In 2023, we will conclude, or we will close this year with a 1,275 billion expenditures and revenues of 1,193 billion, which is higher than we announced last year of our expectations of revenues. The non-oil economic activity today is or has become a synonym to non-oil revenues for the government. Our effort to enhance our economic and develop strategies and enhance investment in the economy by the private sector is what will enhance our non-oil revenues. And consequently, the fluctuations of oil prices will greatly impact the expenditure, and the balance will be less. So we noticed that despite the reduction of oil production and the reduction in the fall of power prices in the world, including oil prices, yet we improved and we increased our expenditure, and that sends another message. The message behind increasing expenditure is that we have reached to a point where we have covered almost half the period since we launched Vision 2030 until we reach to the goals of Vision 2030. The government has done an overall revision of strategies, and from all aspects, from all its intersections and all their priorities, and found great opportunities to enhance the implementation of some strategies, such as the capital expenditure, which were expected to spend in the year 150 billion. We're going to finish this year with a capital expenditure beyond 200 billion, which is a huge amount. The return of this expenditure has been fulfilled. However, more will be fulfilled next year and the year after, because the capital expenditure takes time to yield outcomes. Therefore, we will find that the figures which were issued by the central bank, the kingdom's revenues improved during the year as an outcome of the economic activity. And here, usually we don't want to have extra income from outside the kingdom. Not the kingdom, not anybody want to increase their revenues from inside the kingdom. But if these are productive and not from consumption, then it becomes a positive news. It's good that, according to the central bank, the greater percentage of increasing revenues came from what we call the middle products or the capital products, tools, equipment for factories, for example, or construction, or other inputs for production. This is good news, which means the outcomes are going to be positive over the next years, and therefore we are optimistic of the growth of the overall non-oil GDP, not this year only, which is going to get to 5%, but also on average for the next few years, which will be around 6%. Regarding the year 2024, you have seen that these expenditures will be 1,251,000,000 and the revenues around 1,172,000,000,000. I repeat again, these revenues, and we will remember this again next year, I will remind you of the same words again, these revenues in estimation are a little bit conservative. However, because we do not want to be over-optimistic, we want to be more transparent. These are expectations, and that's what we hope. And God willing, we will achieve greater revenues. What is the meaning of the difference between expenditures and revenues? There's going to be an 82 billion deficit. Last year, the scenario, the DESA scenario was at around 82 billion. And we are not far from expectations. This is despite the fact that in revenues, we had achieved higher revenues than last year. However, the government chose to spend more in order to accelerate the implementation of strategies and projects, and therefore accepted this percentage of deficit. This percentage in general and at the global level is not worrying, since deficit goes into productive costs. When I borrow in order to open a productive effort. Project is not the same as when I borrow to consume. The government believes that they have no objection to find a 2% of the GDP deficit, which is the global average is about 2 to 3%. We have no issue with accepting 2 to 3% deficit, especially if this deficit is going to be as an outcome for spending on enhancing the economy and being productive. In relation to the sectors, I'm not going to read that. It is available on the ministry's website and in the public. This is the economic sectors for next year, and the information is available for you. Regarding the medium-term revenues, these are our expectations, and I would like to say again, to a great extent, these expectations are a bit more conservative, and we bear in mind any sudden changes or happenings at the global level. Therefore, we try to be a bit conservative with our expectations. As for expenditures, we will continue to expand our expenses for the purpose of supporting investments in implementing and executing the strategies, increasing the services to citizens, increasing the quality of services to citizens, either logistics services, transportation, in education services or health services, or also protection and security. There are big expenditure. We will continue to expand even the expenditures which we imported, such as the military expenditure. The strategy is very clear and is being implemented, enhancing the nationalization of military expenditures to hit 5% in 2030. Medium-term deficit, we bear in mind that we keep conservative. We expect a deficit not too big of about 2% of the GDP in the medium term. I will stop here and open it up for the questions, and kindly, please proceed to the podium and kindly mention your name and the organization. If we can take 2 or 3 to save time, please. Good evening, Your Excellency, and good evening to all the colleagues and attendees. If you don't mind, I have a few questions. One question, please mention your name and one question. Mohammed Al-Sharif, Rotana FM. My question, Your Excellency, since you have spoke about the revenues and the medium term, have you bear in mind what His Royal Highness promised in a media in 2023 interview, that the VAT 15% is going to be temporary and will not continue for 5 years? Has this been taken into question, since we are about to end 1.5 years before the end of that term, where he mentioned that it might be before 5 years? Thank you so much. Thank you. Your second question, please. ضيم طيري Arab News. كيف تتوقع استضافة إكسبو 2030 سيؤثر على إنفاق الحكومة وعلى ميزانية على المدى المتوسط والبعيد؟ Please. Yasin Al-Uthman, Al-Ikhbariya. Your Excellency, in light of expectations of a deficit in 2024, will the social security be impacted? Now, please let me answer these questions, and I will take 3 more questions. Thank you, Muhammad, for the question. I will mention 2 important things. There are unchanging policies, and there are important economic policies such as diversification, enhancing the private sector, and there are fiscal policies that change according to the situation, including the tax policies. Therefore, we will announce any changes in time, so that I don't spend more time. Now, the economic situation and the financial situation has deficit, but when it is time, we were going to announce any changes, including the VAT. For Dai, I'm going from Arab News. She was asking about, after the announcement of Expo 2030 in Riyadh and hosting it, and congratulations on this big achievement, she's asking about whether this will impact expenditure. This answer is very simple. The Kingdom, when we launched Vision 2030, it launched a number of initiatives and projects and strategies, part of which were related to hosting tourists. And the Kingdom planned to welcome 100 million, and now we will increase that up to 150 million in 2030. The Kingdom that can host such number and build the infrastructure for 150 million tourists will be able to welcome our guests to 2030 without any extra expenditures. To cut a long story short, the infrastructure and the projects that will be built in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in particular in Riyadh from now until 2030, which were planned since the beginning of Vision, and we heard about many projects such as the logistics services and the tourism strategy, building hotels, expanding services, and also the expansion in the water sewage system projects. There will be enough to provide the infrastructure necessary to host Expo 2030, and probably 3 more expos if we have. And I will give you a very simple example. The Qiddiya project alone, which will be about half an hour by car from the Expo, can host 5 or more than 5 expos. The total area is over 10 expos. So let us compare ourselves with other countries that may not have the ready infrastructure and then have to spend more either to host Expo or the World Cup, which we are also going to host in 2034. I think, in brief, you don't need a translation.
I would say
أقول أن رؤية المملكة 2030 عندما بدأت في التخطيط لعديد من الاستراتيجيات عن كيف سننوع الاقتصاد، هذا التنويع الاقتصادي كان يشتمل على استراتيجيات.
And the tourism alone, we planned to receive more than 100 million visitors per year by 2030. So if a city or a country is able to receive 100 and 150 million tourists a year, they will be and should be able to receive 30 or 40 or 50 million visitors of Expo 2030 without much difficulty. So there isn't really any additional expenditure that the government will be putting into this. The city itself, i.e. the town or the village, Expo Village, is going to be a commercial, actually, property built by a commercial company, will be invested beyond the 6 months. Expo is only 6 months. But what follows in the next 20, 30, 40 years for that site will be a commercial site. So it's not going to be wasted. And it will be obviously built sustainably. ياسين من الإخبارية شكرا على السؤال.
Thank you for your question, and I believe it's a crucial question. The deficit in 23 and 24 leads to an opposite result regarding the social protection. If the deficit was an outcome of a shortage in revenues and also puts a pressure on the government to provide basic services, then we might be worried. The deficit in 23 and 24, 25, 26 is a result of increasing expenditure. We intentionally want to increase expenditure and accelerate the implementation of projects. Why? Because it will enhance the growth of our economy. And if I want to explain that more clearly, these projects create job opportunities for citizens. It creates entrepreneurship opportunities for the government. I'm spending more. I encourage the private sector to invest. I offer projects for investors. Those are going to be the citizens. So I'm creating job opportunities, and therefore we improve the income. I will create job opportunities for citizens. When we improve the economy and have more projects, the private sector is going to employ more citizens, and therefore the income of the family will increase in Saudi Arabia, and not the opposite. But in any case, the government continues to give the support for the special cases, and we have noticed about almost 2 months the royal decree to increase the social security by 20%. And we started implementation 2 months ago, and also he ordered the continuation of the citizens account, and we started implementing since the royal decree was issued. Good evening, Atallah Al-Shammari from CNBC Arabia. I want to ask about taxes. We noticed in your expectations, comparing 2022, there was an increase in 2023. I would like to hear your comment on this increase and its reflection on the Saudi economy. Thank you. Good evening, Mohammed Al-Bishi, Al-Sharq. Your Excellency, when the government achieved in 2022 a surplus, you said now we went from stability to sustainability financially. Where are we now in this journey? And also regarding what you talked about, production and its impact on revenues, how do you put the OPEC Plus agreements within your policies of the budget for the next years? How do you deal with these agreements, especially that they are sometimes sudden and surprising? Muhammad Hilal, Al-Sharq Al-Awsat newspaper. Unlike, regardless of the deficit, are you expecting to increase the public debt to increase by issuing bonds and securities to finance any projects of the current budget? Regarding the question about the increase or the expectations to increase for the revenues to grow, and does that mean more taxes? The answer simply no. And I mentioned last year that currently the burdens, when I talk about restructuring, they might witness some changes. I might reduce some fees which are not efficiently implemented, and I might adjust some taxes. But as a percentage of burdens, when I take the non-oil incomes, the taxation part of which is only 18% of the overall GDP, this percentage will not change. I'm not going to increase the burdens on the economy beyond this 18%. What will change the content or the components of these 18% to become more efficient and effective, and also to support the private sector itself. Some economic burdens now might be a little bit difficult for certain projects, especially if they were at the level of revenues. So if they can be put on profits, that might be better. This is now being studied, and we continue to improve it. What is the cause of the increase in revenues? Nothing changed in taxes in 2023. The reason is because of a greater activity, economic activity. We need to enhance and activate the economic activity, enhance investment, enhance employment and job opportunities and entrepreneurship. That means consumption, that means greater economic activity, which gives us better revenues. So the more economic activity, the more revenues. And the main reason for increased revenues is the non-oil activities increase. Mr. Mohammed, thank you for your question. Sustainability is what we want to achieve. But let me reiterate what I said and remind you of what I said about 5 or 6 years ago. When we started with Vision 2030 in 2016, we had a major challenge from different perspectives. First, that the revenues, the non-oil revenues, were not covering more than 10 to 15% of government expenditure. What does that mean? It means 85% of your expenditure is only on oil or debt. Therefore, any fluctuation in the markets will shake our expenditures, and therefore expenditure will fluctuate and not be stable. That was number one. Number two, there was a major challenge in economic diversity or diversification. The third was a deficit that went up to 15% of GDP, which is unsustainable. When I talked about deficit, I talked about 2 to 3%. It could reach 4%, which is acceptable. But to be at 15%, that's unsustainable. It's extremely hard to continue with a 15 or 12% deficit. Therefore, we started the program of the fiscal balance. We needed to achieve financial balance to control deficit to a great extent, either by enhancing revenues or controlling expenditures. And this is what we have achieved last year to achieve the surplus. And we started launching the second phase of the program, which is the sustainability program. It doesn't aim at creating balance. Sustainability, it's called sustainability, that you have a sustainable budget. Sometimes there's deficit, sometimes there's surplus. It's important to have the stability, to have clear expectations for the economic activity, for the private sector, of what is coming to be the revenues, that you are not going to surprise the economy with new burdens. Regarding the last question from Al-Sharq Al-Awsat about financing or subsidy, of course, the deficit will be covered through subsidies, and we have seen the ability of the Public Debt Management Center ability. With Saudi expertise, I'm proud of. I'm personally proud to be part of a national team, either in the Ministry of Finance or in the other affiliate agencies, or those who work in parallel with the Ministry of Finance. Saudis, young Saudis who are capably managing the public debt in Saudi Arabia. And their expectations of the increase of the interest rate, they have taken measures and they have made proposals which were accepted by the ministry to refinance, resubsidize the debt that was going to take place in 24, 25, 26, part of which was covered by the interest rates 2 years ago. And it could reach to 10 or 15 years. That's how we manage debt. Now, will there be issuances this year? Yes. Globally? Yes. Is it going to be in dollar or in other currencies? Based on the market. When are we going to issue? Also based on the market. We are not obliged. We have the financial capability to absorb shocks to a great extent. If the market allows us to issue these bonds, we will, at reasonable prices for certain terms as well. Please, your question. Good evening, Khalaf Al-Khalaf from MBC. Your Excellency, probably everyone notices the increased, the global inflation rates. What are the measures that the government is going to take to face the inflation rates globally and to control the increased prices for the citizens? Good evening. Mariam Al-Mana from Arqam. You mentioned in your preliminary statement 2024 to expectations of a continuous and increasing deficit until 2026. Does that mean the kingdom is expecting a global recession, or is it going to continue to produce oil at a larger scale?
Hi, Minister Abir with
Abir from Bloomberg.
The head of the Russian Sovereign Investment Fund said they agreed with the kingdom to invest around $11 billion in Russia next year. You also said earlier this year that there's no reason stopping you from investing in Iran and having Iran invest here. So my question is, are there any upcoming investment plans in these two countries? And are you worried about sanctions when it comes to them? And then finally, any further investment or aid plans going to Egypt?
Thank you, Mr. Khalaf. Inflation, which I took previously on a slide, is a global phenomenon. Saudi is not out of this world. And the government is dealing with it in all transparency. I will give some examples, some key examples about how the government is dealing with inflation. First, when the government sensed, before the global inflation reached the current rates, which is about 8%, and we expect it to reach to be at 6.6% at the global level, Saudi Arabia today will close this year at a 2.5, 5.6. How did we reach that? I say that we are part of that world. We could sense the beginning of that inflation. We had a decision that we will not increase the gas prices at the global rates. The government placed a cap on the gas prices. The impact was not only on the price of gasoline for anybody's car. The impact is also on the bill of transportation, the restaurants, the retail, because everybody is using gasoline. Therefore, if we can put this cap on this product, which has doubled its price globally, that means we will control inflation in the kingdom. The other part, which I mentioned previously, very simply, because the kingdom chose to link its currency to dollar, and because we do not import so many in dollar, but we import it from other countries whose currency is not related to dollar. The increase of the value of dollar and also the real against the other currencies of the countries where we import, this also reduced the impact of inflation in the kingdom. In addition to this, I mentioned previously, the custodian of the two holy mosques decided to increase the social support by 20% and the citizens' account 2 months ago, and we started to implement it. The government continues to support and subsidize many services and commodities for years, and we continue to do that. Mariam, the deficit in 24 up to 26. I do understand perfectly your worry if the deficit was structural, which is not planned. Because of shocks, because of falling revenues, I understand. But if the deficit is planned, if you have made the revenues that you have made, expected, and you increased expenditure because you have opportunities to improve the productivity of the economy and to encourage and enhance private sector investments. This is investment which is not worrying. 23, 24, 25 until the year 2026. Abir from Bloomberg. Our meeting is about the budget. I'm not going to talk about Russia or Iran, and I will not speak about Egypt. In general, if we have any questions outside the budget, I hope that we focus our questions on the budget only. And you might ask me in other opportunities and other forums, or ask our colleagues in the Foreign Ministry.
Hi, I didn't catch your name. My question is, how will the extended oil cuts into Q1 and potentially beyond impact the economy in Saudi, the budget? And secondly, what is the forecast on U.S. interest rates and how will they impact the non-oil sector?
Forecast of?
And how will what's your forecast on U.S. interest rates and how will that impact the non-oil sector?
Thank you.
Thank you.
السلام عليكم. سليمان عنزي من أخبار 24. معالي الوزير ما هي
Akhbar 24. What are your forecasts for the growth of Saudi economy next year, 2024, and the main challenges which you expect to face to achieve these expectations? Good evening, Fahad Talal. Your Excellency, regarding the privatization of sport clubs. Some sport clubs will be privatized. When will the IPO be open, and will you open it for foreign investment in the Saudi economy? And what are your expectations for the expected revenues from this step? Faisal Al-Mulham, Rotana Khalijiyya. The key strategic plans for the 2024 and the enablement of the private sector and enhanced investment, how will this enablement be and how much is it going to be costing? The sister from Reuters is asking about the impact of reduction of oil production on the budget. I mentioned previously our expectations of revenues, including the oil revenues, are very conservative, bearing in mind all the expectations, either at the global economic situation, including what happens of dialogues or discussions between us and our OPEC and OPEC Plus partners. Consequently, we have those oil revenues experts who are offering various scenarios, who provide the government expectations of certain percentage for any scenario, and then we take the most conservative ones. Mostly there will not be an impact, and our plans of production of oil product will be based on the markets, and the decision is taken at the Ministry of Energy after we receive the directives of the leadership. No expectations now on this budget. Regarding the interest rates, she's asking about our expectations for interest rates and their impact. Of course, the interest rates, when they increase, they impact investment. The cost investment goes up. The good news that despite the increased interest rates, however, we continue to achieve growth in 2023. According to the figures announced by the central bank, there was a growth of 9% despite the interest rate. The explanation is twofold. First, that there are projects, investment projects for the private sector that return of investment is high enough to cover the cost.
طلب على
There's demand for consumption and products by the private sector, which is big enough to make or return, create a good ROI. Anyone will offer their services, and they will bear in mind the cost of the interest rates. What are future expectations? Of course, the short history when the interest rates were at zero or even below zero,
لم تكن طبيعية.
they were not natural. They were not normal. The normal thing is to be at 3 to 5%,
تتذبذب حسب
fluctuate according to the economic situation. This is the normal, and this is common. And this other economists might believe in higher percentages.
وبالتالي أتوقع أن
Therefore, I expect this to be to fall a little bit, but not shortly, not nearly.
24
They might be reduced by towards the end of 2024. I'm not a banking expert, and I will not speak about that, but the expectations of economists are that the levels of interest rates will continue to be high, but at a lower level. The impact is taken into consideration, at least in various studies. We have taken into expectations the interest rates. Now, the time is going. I'm going to take the last three questions only. Faisal Al-Junaydel, Saudi News Agency. My question: What is the reason to spend more on the military sector?
السلام عليكم
صحيفة سبق عبد الحكيم شرق. Your Excellency, in the economic sector, the private sector is growing in employment. 2,300,000 were employed in the private sector. What is the expectation in case some government agencies are privatized? If you allow me, please, for a minute. There are two questions which I did not answer, and I do apologize. It wasn't intentional. There was a question from Al-Iqtisadiyya. He asked about privatization and the outcomes of sports clubs privatization. The answer in brief: sport clubs, the big major ones, were under now PIF now, and their privatization will bring revenues to the PIF and not for the budget. The other clubs, when privatized, we're going to see, will they be under PIF, which might be the case, but the decision has not been made. I will not talk about their valuation. This will be published in time. Suleiman from Channel 24 asked about the economy percentage rate. We expect the overall economy to grow by 4.4 2024, but what's important for us that the overall GDP, the non-oil GDP, we expect it to grow by 6% in the medium term. Faisal, you asked about empowerment of the private sector. Private sector is very important, very, very important. And our work in the government in Vision 2030 focuses mainly on the private sector and its enablement, either in terms of the legislations and in terms of judicial system, improving the quality of the legal side, clear governments and governance, and the ability to forecast. And we noticed the Ministerial Council said clearly that we cannot issue any law before it is also put for revision. For enablement through the national enablement funds, we have the National Enablement Fund, with a strategy to finance the private sector of 470 billion riyals up to 2030. This is a huge financing at rates which are less than the commercial rates. This is great support for the private sector. There's a big group of enablers and incentives for the private sector to enable it to invest. God willing, we will see a very positive reaction by the private sector, by the citizens, to participate in this huge momentum in the economy. Faisal asked about the military expenditure and why it is growing. The reason is that over the 4 or 5 past years, there was great effort to update the military sector programs. This program concluded, and then we created a 10-year plan for the military sectors that relies on the updating the systems to keep pace with the developments in the world, and also bearing in mind the geopolitical challenges in the region and around the world. So we have allocated budgets over 10 years for the military sector, bearing in mind what we need either in aerospace defense, air forces, land forces, or marine forces. The aim is twofold. One, to help for the economy to continue, we need stability, and stability needs security. When you enhance your military capabilities, you enhance your deterrence power, and God willing, you have less threats and you have more stability. The kingdom will continue as a country of peace, calling for peace, believing in peace, and we believe that enhancing our military is going to enhance peace. Also, on the other hand, there's an economic aspect. We spoke, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman mentioned that many times. We are one of the most countries that import military products. Unfortunately, we do not produce enough. Our production was around 2%. Our target in 2030 to reach to 50%. So this expenditure mostly is directed to the nationalization of industries, not only benefiting the military sector. If we look at the advanced countries militarily, we found that so much of their military industries end up to develop civil and technologies and industries that support their economy in general. Abdul Hakim from Sabq asked about the employment in the private sector. First, I want to thank the private sector, and we must admit or acknowledge their positivity in their response to the government's plans to employ our sons and daughters in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's also good to see that we have more quality jobs. Yes, there is employment, and there's also better employment opportunities. And we see this in the average of salaries published on the website of the Human Resources Ministry. And I invite my colleagues here to attend the forum tomorrow. We will see a number of my colleagues in the government and their excellencies, the ministers, in order to explain what happened in 2023 and what are our plans for 2024, including His Excellency, the Minister of Human Resources, and he might be giving you a further question. And please, your question. Muhammad Amir, Al-Muwatin newspaper. In your statement of 2023, the ministry expected a surplus or achieving a surplus of 17 billion riyals. The outcomes now speak about a deficit of 82 billion riyals. This difference, this big difference, does it make us to doubt your expectations for the budgets over the next years and the precision of your statements? This will be our last question, and I'm going to spend a little time. The question is very important, and therefore I expected at the beginning of my presentation such question. And I want to explain
سأعود
this.
له.
I'm going to return to it again.
يمكن ما يمشي
Or
العرض. نعود لشريحة
let's go back to the beginning or the first slide of the revenues of 2023.
إيرادات 23.
The revenues of 2023, when we speak about the statement of 23, which was issued last year,
توقعنا مستوى
we expected a level of revenues which is lower than 1,180 something. A trillion
أقل من هذا الرقم.
lesser than this figure. And our expectations in revenues, in fact, the revenues at 1,130,000,000, that was the expectation. We increased that by 63 billion.
لم تكن توقعاتنا.
So our expectations were not very optimistic or not
كان
precise.
بإمكاننا أن نحقق
We had the ability to achieve a surplus bigger than the 70 billion. We were able to
نقرر أن لا
decide not to increase expenditures and therefore
الفائض اللي كانت تتوقع.
achieve the surplus that they have announced in 2023 budget. This option was put on the table. The decision was not without a decision. It was taken very strategically. Should we commit to the cap of expenditure, or is there a chance to enhance the implementation of some strategies and projects which will create a positive ROI for the economy? And this is what happened.
قررت الحكومة أن
The
تزيد
government decided to increase expenditure even if that led to a deficit at 80-something billion riyals, because this return from this deficit is much bigger than the cost of that deficit. The cost
اضطرار
of borrowing is lesser than the return on this
رأسمالي
capital expenditure,
في البنية التحتية.
which is good in infrastructure and the projects in the economy.
وأشكركم أول شيء على
I will conclude, and I first want to thank you for coming and your interaction and questions. And I want to conclude with words of optimism. First,
لو سئلت
if
عندما توليت
I were asked when I assumed my role as a Minister of
عن
Finance
توقعاتي
about my
نهاية
expectations,
23 أين سنصل
where we will stand at the end of 2023, I wouldn't have
بما وصلنا إليه.
dreamt of where we are now. The challenge was so immense. And I believe the efforts which were exerted
مستوى الحكومة
at the government and the leadership levels were big. At the government and all those who are working here, there were very big efforts, and we have noticed that many in the private sector noticed that the government is now becoming faster and working more with a greater agility and resilience than before. The effort made by the private sector, the great effort by the citizens, and their great faith in Vision 2030 incentivized to a great extent what we have seen today. These big outcomes is to reach from an economy that used to be at a 2.5 trillion
إلى
to
4.1
4.1 trillion
في 6-7 سنوات
in 6 or 7 years
زيادة 65%
with a 65% increase.
غير مسبوقة.
This is unprecedented. This is a huge increase. Very big, huge increase. Not one year we can say that we were just lucky or the increase of the oil prices. This is the outcome of big plans in 7 years. Two, when we see a decrease in unemployment, we notice that there is a big economic activity that accommodates. We have seen unprecedented figures in 2023 in the employment at this rate. We have witnessed a great interaction by SMEs.
من يملك المنشآت الصغيرة
Those who own SMEs today, 45% of which are women.
مشاركة المرأة أن
The
تصل إلى
participation, inclusion of women to reach over 35% of the workforce
نشاط
of the economic activity higher than Vision 2030, that was a big surprise.
الحماس الكبير جدا
The big enthusiasm, the warm enthusiasm by our youth in this
مبهج.
kingdom is very delightful. It makes you very happy.
أخيرا
Finally,
نستعرض التحديات.
we can look at the challenges.
هذه الزيادة الكبيرة
This
جدا
big
في النشاط
increase
السعودي
in Saudi economic activity happened despite the Ukrainian crisis, the Ukrainian and Russian crisis, despite the big inflation at the global level that reached 8 and 9%, despite the big increase in the interest rates in the world, despite the big worry in the world, in the supply chains. Despite all of that, the kingdom was, and the policies and the strategies that were implemented over the 7 years, they were able to achieve the target, and in most cases to go beyond the target. Thank you, everyone, and God willing, we will celebrate next year with greater achievements. Thank you.